this mother whose smaller child, actually she had two kids there that were pushing and jumping on. She came over to us and she said, "Is that your granddaughter?" And we said, "Yes." She said, "She's going to be a CEO one day." And we just got the biggest kick out of that because she is a natural leader. And what was interesting is this woman said, not just because she's, kind of running things, but she said she has a really deep sense of fairness. She's noticing who's been on too long and who hasn't had a turn, and
Yeah.
she's just making sure it's equitable.
Yeah.
Welcome to another edition of KidLead Academy Training Series with Dr. Alan E. Nelson, designed to help parents develop their children to lead so they can succeed. And now, here's Alan.
All right. Hey, I'm excited today to have as our guest Meredith Bell. And let me just give you a quick overview of her bio. She's the host of the podcast Grow Strong Leaders, has over 300 episodes, the author of Strong for Performance and other books. She's also the co-founder of Grow Strong Leaders, offering assessments, tools, coaching for organizations. But what I love is it has an impetus on character and communication. She's also the co-author of Connect with Your Team. And I think most importantly, she's a mom and a grandmother. So she's perfect for this episode. Welcome, Meredith.
Thank you, Alan. I'm excited to be here with you.
Hey, I met you. I'm not sure how I met you, but I looked at your company and I was very impressed with your work. And then when we sort of connected and talked about KidLead, we realized there's kind of a mutual respect there building. And I would love for you to tell our viewers and listeners just a little bit more about your company, because I think it's interesting that character and communication sometimes aren't high on companies' lists because it's all about profit and HR and things like that. But I love your impetus. So, how did you get started with that? And what would be a typical way that you would interact with an organization?
Great, thank you. Well, I started out as a solo consultant, actually going way back. I started out as a fourth grade teacher. And then I got my master's and started working in the school board office, managing different programs, supervising teachers, and realized I didn't do well with the bureaucracy or the politics. And so I extracted from that my passion, which was teaching others, and decided to take that to organizations, especially around communication skills, because that is the key area that people complain about around work, how they are not communicated with or are the way it's done. So I just started working with organizations on things like how to play nicely together, how to be more clear and direct in your communication. And then I met Denny Coates, who was also a solo consultant. And he and I started collaborating on some things and realized we really had the same drive and focus, which was to help leaders become more effective in their roles so that people could thrive. And so he and I decided to put our two businesses together, and we brought in a third partner to manage the business side of the business. And we've been working together now for 33 years. And back in the early 90s, we were looking for a 360 feedback tool, which, if some of your listeners are not familiar with that, it's an automated way to gather input from people who work with an individual. So it isn't just the person's manager giving them feedback, it's those who are impacted by their behavior. And so we created a tool because there wasn't one on the market at the time that met our needs. And we ended up transitioning into that business, which we've been in now for 30 years, of helping people learn how to not just get feedback, but what to do with it once they have received this information. And so we have online training now that is self-paced, self-directed for folks around communication skills and building strong character.
That is a wonderful journey. And if you're watching this, you'll know that we include some of the website, go-to book covers, things like that. You'll also find them in the show notes. If you're listening to this in podcast audio form, you'll find these also in the show notes. So all of that we're going to provide. And I love that journey, fourth grader to business consultant. As someone said, you probably heard this before, but someone said the person you are in fourth grade is the person you're going to be as an adult. And we really start our intensive leadership training in fourth grade. So I think that's a kind of a cool correlation. So our impetus here is helping parents focus on the leadership potential in their 5 to 15-year-old primarily. So why do you think that teaching character intentionally is important for parents? And sometimes why do you think we just assume that they will develop their character on their own? I'd like.
Well, I have to say, Alan, your book, My Kid Leads, when I read that, it was like, oh my gosh, here's a kindred spirit because you're starting at a younger age what we're trying to fix in a way with adults because the fact is character is not a single thing and it isn't static. So it isn't the case of you either have it or you don't. It's actually made up of a number of different behavior patterns. When I've done some webinars and I ask people what word or words come to mind when you hear the word character, integrity is often the one that they mention. But there's so many other aspects of character, and we actually organize them into three different ones: building a stronger self, stronger relationships, and a stronger work ethic. Well, all three of those areas are important for parents to help their kids develop because they're all related to being successful in life, whether it's your job and how you perform on your job or the relationships that you build, who you are, how you show up is going to be viewed by others as either positive or not so good. And so I think it's incumbent on parents to recognize kids don't just automatically learn these things on their own. Some do absorb from witnessing either good examples or poor examples. But the more we can be conscientious and intentional in helping them learn, for instance, how to be generous, how to have empathy for someone else, how to take the initiative without being asked. All of those are highly valued in the workplace, at school, too. Teachers love having students who take the initiative, right? And work hard, put forth effort, have high standards of excellence. All of those are aspects of character, and they, I think, are essential for parents to develop. The nice thing is, it doesn't have to be this major burden or project. It's looking for everyday ways. And that's one of the things you do so well in your book. You give very practical examples of how parents can do this or that to help pull out that leadership aspect of their child. And I'll give you a quick example. My daughter and her husband have two children who currently are 10 and 8. And for years, they've had a little chore chart for them for things to do before meals, such as washing their hands. But the last thing they have before, after they've done all their own personal prep, is to ask, how can I help? How can I help? So when they come over to visit us, I love it that they say, how can I help when I'm getting a meal ready?
That's
And
awesome.
because it's automatic for them. They've been
Yeah.
practicing this for years now. And so that being a part of who they are, can you imagine how valuable that is if they're in school and they're asking the teacher, how can I help? Or when they get to work and they start asking a team member, how can I help you? It's that
Yeah.
mindset, that
Yeah.
practice that gets ingrained over time that I think is essential.
I really like your focus of character being more than just integrity and honesty. I mean, if that is the backbone, right? We have all of these other appendages and things like empathy and validating others and how can I help? My wife has she's a executive director of a large senior facility in Calabasas. So she has about 140 staff. And you would love her. She is just a great leader and great people skills. But one of her pet peeves is she says, I have these staff members who I'll be moving something physically, cleaning something up, and right as soon as I'm done, they'll say, "Oh, do you need any help?" She says it's so strategic that they wait until I'm almost done and ask that. So it reminded me of that. Wouldn't it be great if all kids had that sort of attitude, like, "Hey, how can I help?" I love that. So as a grandmother now, if you were to give advice to Meredith Bell as the mother, what advice would you give yourself? That might be helpful for some of our listeners.
Oh, one of them would be to listen more and talk less. Because I think as parents, because so often we feel like I've got to instill in them this, or I need to teach them that, we don't give them the opportunity to think for themselves and to talk enough. And I'll tell you a real example from being a mother when my daughter was a teenager. She was babysitting a neighbor's two kids, and an incident had happened that caused her to be upset. And so she came home from finishing up that babysitting job that day, and she was upset and she wanted to talk. Well, unfortunately, I put on my, you know, CEO solve the problem kind of hat, and I jumped in probably before she even finished telling me the story. In fact, I know I jumped in too quick. And to her credit, she said, Mom, I already solved this. I just needed you to listen. And, that's 25 years ago. And it still, is on my heart because she was right. I
Yeah.
was waiting to respond rather than really listening to what she was trying to say. And I missed the opportunity to affirm her ability to solve that problem herself. And so I think, we get distracted. There's so many things that, we're paying attention to all these different devices now. And if we can give our children full attention when they're speaking and make the time to be with them in a given moment, fully present, that is one of the greatest gifts that we can give to them that they'll remember the rest of their lives. So I would say listening is the number one thing I would emphasize with myself.
And as you told that story, I thought, well, obviously you had done a really good job developing her emotional intelligence because for a teenager to just say it that way, that was so healthy. I love that.
It was, and I appreciated her saying that, and I apologized to her right then because someone else might have just skulked away. I thought it was indicative of the strength of our relationship that she could be honest with me that way and speak
Yeah.
up instead of just get angry and stomp off.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So one of the reasons why I wanted you on this series is because you have a unique opportunity to be both a mother and grandmother, but also to see for so many years the challenges that go on in the workplace. So obviously we're trying to sort of marry those two and say, how do we develop leaders while they're moldable, not moldy? So what are some of the things that you see that organizations struggle with or leaders struggle with in organizations that would benefit parents and or those who try to raise future leaders?
One of them ties back to something I mentioned, which is taking time. These days, leaders are under so much pressure, to get results, to perform, get the best out of their people. And so sometimes they don't feel they have the time to sit down and really get to know them and get to know what's important to them. And I think that if they do that periodically, not just once a year for, a performance review, but on a regular basis, have these one-on-one conversations. And they don't have to take that long, we're talking 10, 15 minutes, but just to find out, not work related, but what's going on with you? How are you doing? And even discovering where is it you'd like to go with your career? How can I support you with that? To show the person they really genuinely care about them. And that's sort of the point I was making earlier with parents, taking the time to really get to know your child and find out what is important to them, because we can make assumptions about people, whether we're a parent or a manager, that may or may not be accurate if we don't check it out with them. We can make assumptions about why they said something they did, why they behaved a certain way, and we could be totally wrong. So being willing to invest the time to, check out how they are and what they need from us. How can I best support you? How can I be a better parent to you? You might be surprised at what the person says in response.
I love that because you probably get some good answers. I think a lot of parents fear that because they say, I want to stay up till 10. I want to eat ice cream whenever I want. But sometimes they say some amazingly insightful things. I love that. As you look at adults, what are a couple other common character gaps that you see that maybe we
Mm.
can head off at the pass?
A big one is self-awareness. That's when you look at a lot of leadership courses, they start with self-awareness,
Huh.
whether it's taking assessments that help a person understand their personality or their style or their strengths. Understanding yourself is a key to being effective with others. And too many people get so busy doing, doing, doing that they don't stop to look at who am I being in the world? You know, Understanding myself is key to understanding and extending that understanding to others. What I have found personally is the times when I feel most agitated or intolerant of someone else is when I'm unhappy with something about myself. But I'm looking outward instead of inward. And
Mm.
so I think the more leaders, the more parents can become more aware of their own thinking, their own behavior, and how it impacts those around them, the better they're able to make adjustments to, and it's not making you wrong and somebody else right or vice versa. It's just looking at what works. How can I be as effective as possible without looking at blaming, judging, criticizing myself or someone else, but just looking at how can I make the most of who I am? And that takes, again, time to do that self reflection and learn more about my strengths and areas that I may not be aware of. And that goes back to asking people, you know, what would make life with me more fun for you, more enjoyable for you? What would working with me how could I be different? Not asking for criticism, but looking forward. What would you like to see in the future that you may not be receiving from me now, that you'd like more of or less of? There's all kinds of ways we can pose that question to others to help us learn more about ourselves and how we work.
I like the way you put that because it sounded like if we would be more family-like in our workplace and maybe be more leader-oriented in our family life, because sometimes we give our best efforts to our job and then we come home and we have the residual. And I've done that at times because, here I have a doctorate in leadership, I write books, but then I come home and I think, okay, I'm dad. But I need to be a leader. I need to show up and be positive and motivational. Things that I would do as a leader, sometimes I didn't do as a dad. And as I reflect back, I see that as a miss. And I have a couple colleagues at the Naval Postgraduate School, and they're thinking of working on a book together because they love family life, but they're looking at leadership principles, organizational behavior principles applied to the family so that we would be more maybe kind and gentler in the workplace, but then when we come home, we want to lead our team well. And that's kind of what I heard you saying. I hope I wasn't imposing that, but I like that. Well, in the area of communication, What are some of the what is a common challenge you see in organizational life that maybe we could work on with our kids or with the family?
Well, the first one I mentioned was listening with my own example,
Yes.
but it's so prevalent, that we listen to respond. We listen to correct or judge or prove somebody wrong and we're right, instead of listening deeply for the meaning. What's behind that? What are the feelings they're conveying? So I think that's a key element. The other one is around feedback. Unfortunately, Alan, as you well know, these skills are not taught in school, and parents are doing the best they can with what they learned over time. But feedback is an area that I see leaders hesitant both to give constructive feedback because they're not sure how to deliver it in a way that'll land well with the other person, and even receiving feedback, because of course there's the tendency, if we are hearing something that's a surprise to us, that was a blind spot that somebody is addressing with us, we aren't always very gracious in the way we receive that feedback. So we might defend ourselves, justify, explain, again, try to prove ourselves right. So those two aspects of feedback, and actually there's a third one of giving positive feedback, acknowledging specifics that the person has done. And again, this is so beautiful at home as well as at work, not just to praise a child for every little thing, but noticing what it is they're doing, where they're putting forth an effort, no matter how the result, what the result is that they get. If they're putting forth effort, if they're really trying, even if they fail, to acknowledge that and help them see, okay, I'm a winner, even if this didn't work out. My self-esteem doesn't have to take a beating just because I wasn't able to do what I hoped to do. So recognizing, looking for, first of all, and noticing, and then expressing specific appreciation for something, not just, oh, you're a great kid or attaboy or that sort of general thing. That's positive, but it's more powerful and impactful when it's specific. So I would say those three aspects of feedback are critical.
I like that. That's great. Great advice. I'm going to also bring up your colleagues Denny's book, Communicating with Your Kids, because I think that's a great resource. I had him on
Yeah.
another podcast. So you've read the book or part of the book, My Kid Leads, and you hang out with your grandkids, and you have this plethora of wisdom in organizational life and leadership development. Where do you now start to see some of the leadership inklings in your grandkids?
Well, it's funny. Johanna, who's 10, has always, since she was little, and this was one of the things I loved in your book, where you were saying you can even pick up natural leadership tendencies in preschool. And sure enough, she was one that even though she was 4, if there were kids around her that were 6 or 7, she'd be organizing them into some game that they would play. She was never and isn't intimidated by
Oh,
age, size. It's like she's driven to put things together, right? People together. And so a recent example is when we took them to this playground and she went over to this merry-go-round ride where, the kids jump on and somebody's pushing them around in a circle. Well, she starts my husband and I were just sitting on this bench watching this in action. We weren't close enough to hear everything she said, but we could see her body language and her pointing to people and collecting these imaginary tickets. She was the train conductor. And so she
oh,
would tell them where we're going on the next stop. So who wants to get on, who wants to get off. I mean, she was running this operation,
that's
right?
funny.
And this mother whose smaller child, actually she had 2 kids there that were pushing and jumping on. She came over to us and she said, "Is that your granddaughter?" And we said, "Yes." She said, "She's going to be a CEO one day." And we just got the biggest kick out of that because she is a natural leader. And what was interesting is this woman said, not just because she's, kind of running things, But she said she has a really deep sense of fairness. She's noticing who's been on too long and who hasn't had a turn, and
Yeah,
she's just making sure it's equitable.
yeah,
And I just loved that because that sensitivity to others, that
yeah,
empathy, is to me a key aspect of developing leadership. James he's got a different personality. And you mentioned your three sons being different, and that's the way it is here. He's not one to just, take charge and try to run things. He stands up on his own with Joe when she tries to, you know, make him the follower all the time.
yeah.
So he's learned to be assertive with her, but he's not the one that's going to be going out there like that and making friends with everybody on the playground like she does.
That's funny. It'll be really fun if in 20 years she sees this recording and she is CEO of some company. So that's awesome. So any final words, advice, kind of commingling your experience with adult leaders and organizations and trying to think in terms of parents developing their child's leadership potential. Any last wisdom you have for us?
Yes, Alan, what's occurring to me is parents need to develop these themselves so they can be role models for their kids. Kids pick up on behavior. You can say one thing to them, but if you're not living it yourself, it's sort of like empty words. So, looking at your own character, your own different behavior patterns, what are the ones that you most want your children to emulate? And where are there perhaps gaps in where you would like to be yourself and what you want your children to adopt? And an example would be trust, trusting others, but also being trustworthy. And that's one of the things that I think parents have the opportunity to do with their kids. For example, Johanna and James were over and they were allowed to watch TV while I was getting dinner ready. And I said, at the end of this episode, now you need to stop. Well, I knew that that episode had gone, they had gone past when the episode was over and the TV was still on. And so I came up and I said, are you watching another? Yes, we are. So I said, I had a little lesson for them around trust and how if I've asked you to do something and we have this agreement and you have agreed to do that and you don't, then that affects my ability to trust you the next time. And so there can be negative consequences from you not following through and doing what I've asked you to do without getting upset, but just explaining
Yeah,
here's what
yeah,
happens when you don't do what you said you would do,
I love that.
which is tied in with integrity. So I think
Yeah.
looking at how am I behaving as a parent, as a grandparent, as a leader, where I'm saying I want my people to do this, am I doing it myself?
What I heard you say, especially with that illustration, is life is full of hundreds and hundreds of these teachable moments. And I think I remember sometimes, many times probably, as a parent, I would come in as the authoritarian and say, I told you not to do that, and then you just turn it off, as opposed to just calmly say, okay, let me talk to you about trust. What a great way to build that without making it a punitive thing. So great wisdom. Meredith, thank you so much. I'm sure down the road I'll invite you back because we got to have some more Joe stories, right? And this will be fun.
Yeah, we will.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you and your work, and we'll provide all these materials in the show notes and on the screen. And we appreciate your value that you're bringing to not only young parents, but also organizations. You just run the gamut. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Alan.